Welcome everyone to the Sedgwick Wellness Center. We're here today with Morell and myself, Shawn Johnson, to talk a little bit about transitional return to work and ADA and how they work together and the difference between them. So as we get started here, Adam, can you just help us sort of level set, and what is the difference between a transitional return to work program and ADA?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I also want to thank RIMS for having us today as well. So when you're talking about an ADA accommodation, that's when you are providing to an employee who can't do their current job due to an impairment. You're granting them an accommodation that's going to allow them to do the essential functions of the job. Generally speaking, there are three types of accommodations. You got accommodations within the job. You've got accommodations with a leave of absence, and accommodations based on a job reassignment. Now, by contrast, a return to work program is a formal plan that helps employees return to work as soon as possible after an illness or injury. And as you mentioned earlier, Shawn, it focuses on transitional, light, or modified duty. And sometimes, if the program is successful, then it eliminates the need for an ADA accommodation at all. Another thing to point out is that a return to work program is temporary. It's finite and it contains specified timeframes. An accommodation doesn't necessarily have a definite end date. It's more of an individualized assessment. And so now that we've looked at the differences between an accommodation and return to work, let's talk a little bit, Shawn, more about the benefits of a return to work program.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it really comes back to productivity. As we know, what's driving every company out there today is productivity. And the way in which having a strong return to work program benefits that is through cost reduction. So we know that not having to replace employees, not having to retrain employees saves on hard dollar costs. Employee engagement. We know that when employees are at work and engaged, that leads to improved morale, not just for that employee themselves, but for the entire employee population around them. We know that people get tired of doing other people's work, and so we need everybody there pulling their own weight, and that will lead to the employee engagement and morale issue. Also, employees heal faster. There are studies out there that show that when an employee returns back to work, they actually recover fully quicker than if they were to sit at home and try to work through that themselves. Interestingly enough, in 2020, a study done by DMEC says that 60% of employees say that if they had access to a return to work program, that would actually increase their likelihood of staying with an employer. So even the employees themselves recognize the benefit of an employer having a strong return to work program. So now that we sort of know what the benefits are, Adam, can you sort of tell us, what does a transitional return to work program usually, what's that usually comprised of?
Yeah, of course. Now, generally speaking, one size is not going to fit all. So some of the time periods and measurements that I give you are going to reflect what we generally see. But of course, an employer has the ability to tailor the program any way they want. What we generally see is that these transitional or light duty assignments go 60 days or 90 days within a 12-month calendar period for each employee. We also think, and this is what we also see, is that there is a 30-day check-in period each month. So what I mean by that is, you've got a 60-day plan or a 90-day plan, what have you. Every 30 days, there's a check-in to see how the plan is working. And the reason that's important is because obviously the goal is to get the employee back to work at 100% full duty as soon as possible. Maybe, as Shawn talked about, the program has helped the employee to heal quicker and they don't need the 60 days or the 90 days. So that 30-day check-in is important. We also see a lot of organizations build in a one-time 30-day extension. So if at the end of 90 days or 60 days, the employee isn't ready to return to work full-time, without going through a lot of hullabaloo, they'll just extend it by 30 days. Another thing to keep in mind is that administratively, it makes sense to keep the employee paid during the return to work program at the same rate of pay that they were earning beforehand. This makes things easier, and again, it contributes to that feeling of employee morale and productivity. Now, the 60 days comes up, the 90 days comes up, whichever way you do it. Maybe you do the 30-day extension at the end. If at the end of the program and after the extension, the employee still is not able to return to work full time, that's when the ADA would kick in and you would do the individualized assessment and have the interactive dialogue to determine next steps. That is what a program generally is comprised of, but any program, in order to succeed, is going to need some backing from the organization to be successful. Shawn, how can an organization ensure that if they roll out a program like this, that it will be successful?
Yeah, well, just like any program that an employer is going to roll down, it has to come from the top. So if you do not have all the way up to executive buy-in as to why return to work is important, then it's never going to succeed at any level. So first and foremost, it has to be coming from the top. This should be pretty easy to do because generally speaking, it should be aligned with the strategic direction of the company and key initiatives. We all know that usually what those are comprised of are increased productivity, decreased cost. As we just discussed earlier, those are the benefits of having a strong return to work program. So it should be pretty easy to get buy-in on these initiatives. However, it's important that once it is bought into, that it's communicated and it's communicated well throughout the entire organization. And that it's really tied to the fact that this is in alignment with what your goals and initiatives already are. So you need to be engaged in this. You need to be accepting of these opportunities for your employees to return to work as soon as possible.
Absolutely. When you have organizations walking the talk and they're backing it up with communication, then you really are going to be more successful in having the program take off. That actually leads me to another question. What is it that Sedgwick can do to help employers in this space?
Yeah, well, everything that Sedgwick does has the employee at the heart of it. And so really when you talk about any sort of holistic program, whether that be regarding their workers' compensation, their absence management, really using this as an opportunity to holistically have a program that touches all of those things to make sure that all employees are getting the same opportunity to return back to work as safely and quickly as possible is really where Sedgwick comes in. We oftentimes touch those employees at different points within those processes. And so we can really be the gatekeeper there, and we can make sure that whether we're managing the leave and someone else is managing the comp, whether we're managing all of the components of it, we can really make sure that that individual is being looked at for those return to work opportunities. Also, we can, be the ones that can make sure that the proper administration process is followed. So the employer doesn't necessarily have to remember that they need to do X and Y and Z. Sedgwick can make sure that all of those processes are followed, documented, and well received by both the employer and the employee. Adam, it's interesting, ADA, return to work, all of those words have probably been, in more of these conferences and such in the last few years than ever before. Why is that?
So, we talked earlier about ADA being separate from return to work. And yeah, if the employee doesn't succeed within the time frame of the return to work program, that's when ADA is going to kick in and you're going to enter into the interactive dialogue. And to answer your question, ADA just in general is timely for several reasons. Last year, of course, with COVID-19 coming up, I spent a lot of time last year really helping clients navigate the pandemic. You know, a lot of them weren't around in 1918 when the Spanish flu came around, so they really did look to us and to different organizations and expertise to help them get through this. So yeah, in 2020, you heard a ton about ADA. But that aside, in 2020, ADA had a big birthday. ADA turned 30 years old. I mean, ADA has been around even longer than FMLA. And even though it's 30 years old, it continues to evolve and be front and center. Here's one of the reasons why, and it's unrelated to COVID and the pandemic. In 2019, for the first time in history, disability was cited more often than any other basis of discrimination when employees made charges with the EOC. Let's think about that for a second. Disability discrimination was cited more often than race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or age. This is the first time in the history of the ADA that has been the case. You know, race has been the most often cited basis forever. And I think it's because employees are really becoming more aware of their rights under ADA. So the idea and the importance of accommodating employees and bringing them back to work as soon as possible really is as more important than ever. And as a recovering lawyer, I can tell you, because I've done work, Shawn, as you know, I've done work for plaintiffs and I've done work on the defense side. Never in the same case, by the way. But when I was doing plaintiffs work, I can tell you that out of every 5 employees that came into my office claiming discrimination, maybe only 1 out of 5 could specify the law that they thought was broken. But 5 out of 5, all of them thought that they were treated unfairly. And when you've got a consistent approach to ADA, you've got a consistent approach to stay at work and return to work, that's really the number one thing that you can do to minimize your legal exposure. So now we know ADA front and center. Why, though, would I, as an organization, choose to outsource this? My managers are on the front lines. They are the ones that are dealing with the employees every day. Why wouldn't I just let them have that as part of their supervisory responsibilities?
Yeah, well, I think you hit on the key in your, when you were a recovering attorney there in, the unfair treatment of employees, right? Those employees coming to you felt like something was unfair. And usually what that is stemmed from is that this happened to me, but that happened to another employee, and I saw it all play out and it didn't feel fair. And so really the reason for outsourcing and getting it out of the hands of those frontline supervisors, managers, is to ensure the consistency of every employee being treated the right way, the same way, really. And we just know that human nature it is really hard for somebody who deals with employees day in and day out to always treat everybody exactly the same. We know just human nature is if you have a poor performer versus a strong performer, oftentimes that strong performer is going to get preferential treatment. And those are the types of things that will get you into trouble the fastest under things like the ADA. So really the consistency in process, you outsource it, a third party becomes your neutral eyes and ears. And so they can really make objective decisions based on what is going on with the employee from a medical standpoint, as opposed to from a performance standpoint. Also, you'll have a single system of record. And so we know that we cannot stop employees from filing these cases. They all have the right to file their case. But what you can do is protect yourself and have a very strongly defensible case. And that's really what it's about. So you're consistent, so you can demonstrate that. You have a system of record that documents date and time stamps every single interaction that was had, every single piece of documentation that was sent and received. And once you have that, that is what is going to prove to the courts that you really did act in the best interest of the employee and that all of the steps that should have been followed were followed. And really, honestly, the other thing that comes from outsourcing is the benefit of the experience of getting to see this play out, not just across your organization, but across the biggest and brightest organizations within, the country. And so what we can do from an outsource perspective is continually to bring those best practices. So we know that how you implement something today is not the same as 2 years from now, 4 years from now. It's really hard as an individual organization to keep up with all of that because they're really usually just heads down buried trying to just figure out what's going on within their organization. And when you outsource that, we're seeing what's going on with, hundreds of organizations in this space, and we can help you maybe tweak and improve your process based on the experience that we're seeing with other clients as well. So Adam, last sort of question here. Mm-hmm. What do you believe is the number one accommodation trend that employers should be aware of and be on the lookout for?
I don't even need to hold my finger up to the wind to answer this question. It's remote work. It's working from home. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that DMEC survey. That same survey said that in 2020, 68% of employers reported an increase in accommodation requests in 2020 compared to 2019. No surprise. The number one requested accommodation, working remotely. And we think this is going to continue. I mean, historically, if you think about it, many employers before the pandemic would just claim almost by rote, okay, we can't let people work from home. It would be an undue burden. Last year, employers, by circumstance, were forced to relook at this policy, and organizations that for hundreds of years that would never allow employees to work from home were put in a position where they were forced to have them work from home. And here we are over a year into this pandemic. And you know what? A lot of employers have had success with that newly remote workplace. So it's going to be harder to claim undue burden. It's going to be harder to claim that the logistics aren't there, or we just can't collaborate when we're working from home. I would argue that 13 or so months into this pandemic, we've seen attitudes change about that kind of thing. So it's not going to be as easy to dismiss those accommodation requests when they come up. And so when they come up, they will continue to come up, and employers are really going to have to be looking at them a little bit more open-mindedly. Let's also not forget the mental health aspect of what has been going on with COVID. I think that with all of the uncertainties about this virus, I do think that we will still continue, not just because of logistics and circumstance, but for health reasons. A lot of folks are going to ask to continue to, to stay working from home. So that's not going away. RIMS, conference attendees, thanks so much for having us. Hopefully next year we'll be doing this in person. Enjoy the rest of the conference and stay healthy, everybody.